Welcome to Exceptional Leadership. I'm your host, Anita Brooks. Though my focus is primarily pointed to leadership at an organizational level, let me assure you, most of what I share will translate to almost any aspect of life. Just tweak the info to fit your leadership role. Because whether you approach my content as a corporate leader, middle manager, small business owner, entrepreneur, or as a family member or friend, you are influencing someone. The question is, are you influencing well, exceptionally well? So let's take courage, exercise wisdom, and humbly invest in the people we are called to influence. Join me on a quest, not for perfection, but absolutely for exceptional leadership. Welcome back to another episode. Every once in a while, I run into a person who really epitomizes my mission to remind us that we all influence someone. We're all leading someone. And today I have a guest that is going to join me, and we're going to talk about this, but it might be a little differently from what you might imagine. She actually works with children. She's a children's author, but I want you to pay close attention. If you do not have children, don't turn this episode out, because one thing I want to assure you, human nature is human nature is human nature. And many times what we're dealing with in the workplace started in childhood. And many of the things that help resolve issues in the workplace are things that will help resolve in childhood as well. So all of this is going to pertain to your leadership, and I promise you we're going to maintain that focus today. But without further ado, let me welcome Stacy to the show. And Stacy, I'm going to let you share with our listeners the correct pronunciation of your last name and the spelling, because I don't want to mess it up.
So yes, I'm Stacy Leicht, Leicht. So it's a German background, so it has the CH in it. But you pronounce it just like sunlight or light bulb.
Awesome. That's one thing that I know is so important to all of us as people, is that our names are gotten right. And so I want to make sure that I always honor that. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here with you.
Tell us, Stacy, what you do, what has driven you to this interest that you have, and then we're going to dig into how this specifically applies to leadership down in the trenches in everyday life.
I've been a teacher since I got out of college, and I started at the elementary level, worked in the middle grade, and actually work at a university in Greensboro, North Carolina currently. I've traveled through the grades and have loved every part of my journey through the different levels of education. And so at this point, this is kind of my favorite time of life, because I'm actually training juniors and seniors in the elementary ed department at UNC Greensboro to be future teachers and future leaders. And so, and they lead children of all ages when they walk out the door. So I'm training future leaders, and then they are also in turn training future leaders. So the cycle continues.
Yes. And so I want to dig into some of that training that you're giving, and then talk about what I know from my world as a business coach that leaders out in the real world are looking for, and then see how that meshes, and maybe see if you have some special insights for us as well. So you're training these future leaders. If someone were to come to you, and I'm sure that you've been doing this long enough now that you've seen some of your students come through the ranks, and they've went out into the world, and some of them are probably very successful, and some of them may have had a few struggles along the way. Is there any particular point that you would make to these future leaders that you'd remind them, don't forget this when you get in the workplace, when you're working with other people, especially if you're placed into a leadership position? Is there any one or two points that you would say, this is something you have got to remember to be successful?
I have two key words that I say to every student that walks into any of my classes as a professor. And I'll say, in order to be successful in this classroom, but in order to be successful in business or in the classroom or working with parent or a principal, you have to have great communication and you have to have great effort. And those are the two key things.
I was doing a business coaching scope just 2 days ago. And here I am. I'm in a room with multi-layered leaders. So I have the executive team, I have the middle management team, and then I have what they call shift leaders in this group.
Mm-hmm.
It was a manufacturing place. And it's so interesting. We're going through and I talk about invisible drains. So these are the things that drain money, time, and energy, although we don't always necessarily identify what the true drain is. But one of the core drains is communication. And so we're going through this and we're going through some specific communication areas that are causing issues. And the human resources director, raised his hand and he goes, Anita, don't you think communication is always a problem? And I laughed and I said, it's an evergreen topic. We will always have to deal with it. And the fact is, there will never be 100% we got it all right communication. But the fact is, we can elevate and raise our ability to communicate so much better if we focus on it intentionally and if we don't just kind of opt out. So I love the fact that you remind them of that. And is there anything specifically about communication that you would say to our listeners?
When I work with college students, what I tell them is don't just communicate, but be proactive in communicating. Therefore, I don't want you to communicate with me after the fact. I don't want you to call me and say, I'm not going to have that assignment in that was due last night. I want you to call me 3 days before and say, listen, I'm struggling to get this assignment done. Can you work with me or can you tutor me or what can you do to help me be prepared to get the assignment done? Or maybe I need an extension, but at least I'm going to know on the front end that there's a problem and it's not going to take me by surprise.
That is so good. There's some good stuff in there. So again, I'm going to go back to a couple of days ago when I'm in this business coaching scope. One of the things that we unlayered is that people were waiting too long to communicate. So I'm an advocate of early and often. That's what I preach it all the time. Communicate early and often. But one of the other things that was missing for them was they were not putting timestamps or deadlines, if you will, for when they needed information back. So there was all this open-endedness and the recipient didn't always necessarily understand what the expectation was for when something was due or when it was needed. And that simple little piece, by just taking care of that, can plug a lot of conflict and a lot of frustration for people.
Right. People like structure generally, and they like to know what's expected of them so that they can meet the expectation. I think generally speaking, the majority of people want to do well and they want to meet expectations. But if management or teachers in my career, if we don't set the expectations ahead of time, then that's where we are lacking. So when I have a student say to me, you didn't put a due date on this, or you didn't put a rubric, rather than getting upset with them, I have to look back and say, you're right. I didn't set the best expectations. So then it's a learning curve for me, but it's good feedback. And so I can continue to grow and change and get better.
So that's a brilliant insight. So the first of the core invisible drains I teach on is expectation. But I love that you just said the leader has to take responsibility and they have to be willing to do an honest analysis of the situation and be responsible for maybe where they did not communicate their expectations. So I love that you shared that. Well, let's switch gears, Stacy, and let's talk about the effort side. So you said communication and effort. So what would you say to future leaders or current leaders about that point?
Well, in my position as professor, effort to me looks like someone that is going to be prepared by, if I'm saying I want them to have their reading done and be able to engage in a good Socratic seminar and have good dialogue. I want them to be prepared so that we can have rich dialogue and learn about a topic. Or I want them to do a good job on a homework assignment and care, because they are becoming professionals and this is who they are. I'm putting a stamp of approval, my stamp of approval on them when they graduate, saying, I think that you are ready to teach children. I think you're ready to teach my grandchild or my neighbor's child or someone else's child. And I take that very seriously. So effort for me is huge. And it doesn't mean you have to be perfect. But what it means is you have to really show me that you care and that you're passionate. And if I don't see those two things, then we're going to have a conversation about, is this really something that you should be pursuing, especially for your degree, because I want you to be happy when you get up every morning and go to your job. I don't want you to get up and just, if I was going to be an accountant, I wouldn't do very well with that. I'm not a numbers person. So if I were to be trying to get a degree in accounting, I guarantee a professor would have a conversation with me like, it's probably not the place for you. It doesn't look like your skill set matches this. And I think that those are conversations that are hard conversations, but they're conversations that need to be had when we're trying to make the best of our companies. We're making the best situations for our children, especially when we want them to have the best teachers in front of them. And I just think effort just has to go hand in hand with communication for that to happen.
That is so applicable in the workplace, Stacy. One, talking about the care and the passion. So another thing that I work with companies and organizations is job fits. I'm passionate about us first understanding the importance of correct job fit. I always tell people you can absolutely shove a square peg into a round hole. You can do that, but you will spend your money, time, and energy pulling splinters every day, day after day. And that employee is going to be miserable, and they'll do it for a while, but they won't care. They won't be engaged. And eventually they'll end up leaving, and it hurts the performance and productivity of the entire organization. But I love the fact that you talk about you need to have that conversation with people as a leader. Like you need to spend some time, invest some time in having conversation and dialogue to understand what the appropriate job fits are. And it doesn't mean we all get to do everything we just love and want to do all the time. We all have to do things we don't like every once in a while, but the majority of our time should be in our sweet spot for us to be effective. So leader, if you're listening, you can't just blame the other person and say, well, they should tell me. No, you need to take the initiative. It is your responsibility to do that research and unearth from people what are some of their skills and strong suits. It's amazing sometimes just by having that kind of conversation, you may discover that they have abilities that you need, but right now you don't have someone to fill it. But if you don't have the conversation, then you're going to lack that ability to be able to discover that and then tap into it, which makes everybody happier.
Well, and it makes people feel like someone cares about them. If you have simple conversation about what are your goals and dreams and passions and how does this apply to your job, then there's another step to that because they feel cared for. And then they're going to be happier in the workplace when they feel like someone there cares about me. That doesn't mean I'm going to get that at my dream job tomorrow, but it means they know that this is what my goal is and they're going to help me try to get there. And I just think that is the way to create an atmosphere where people are happy. We need to make sure that in order to be productive, people feel desired and wanted in the workplace.
You are so right. And so many times leaders come to me and they're asking me, how can we boost morale? How can we increase engagement? How can we get our people to care more about the work that they do? Leaders, one of the first and most important things you can do literally costs the company nothing except for a little bit of your time. And that is to do exactly what Stacy just described. Go and talk to that employee. Look at them in the eye and then do the second part of communication, which is not talking at people, but listen to hear them. When you do that with human beings, you automatically get engagement. So many people don't feel heard. If you will talk to someone, ask them questions about them, listen to them, that will feel rewarding to them. And the loyalty that you gain from that is exponential. So I love that you shared that, Stacy.
Yeah, I agree with you. Loyalty and respect would come back in great folds for the employer.
Yes, for sure. And when people feel like you care, then the other thing is they end up oftentimes mimicking what they see and feel and experience from you. So if you have passion and you care, you have positive energy, guess what? Many times they're going to follow that example that you've set.
Yeah, it can become the culture in the workplace that the person in charge has set forth, but it can also go the other way. If the top dog doesn't have a positive way of doing things, it can also change the culture in a negative way. So that's where people really have to look at themselves as the president of a company or whoever's in charge and looking to see, am feeding my flock good things in order to get something good back.
That is 100% accurate. Leaders set the tone. They set the tone for their area, for their department, for the organization as a whole, depending on what kind of leadership role they fill. But again, whatever mood, if you will, you have, people are going to mirror that, and the culture itself is going to follow that. So as a leader, look, I hate to tell you, but you are not just influencing the work that's done, but you're influencing how it's done, the attitude, and just the vibe in the air. So take that to heart and make it today your intentional mission that you're going to change that if it needs changed, or you're going to maintain that if you're already doing a great job with it. But exceptional leadership understands that you set that tone. Okay, Stacy, I want to switch gears completely now because I'm so fascinated with some of your focus in your writing, and I know that you use this in your influence and as you're teaching as well. But share with our listeners about your book. I mentioned it at the beginning of the program. So I want to hear about that. And then let's talk about the influence on children, but then also listeners always be thinking how this also is relevant with the people that you're leading. So tell us about that, Stacy.
Yeah, thank you for that opportunity. So as I mentioned, I've been a teacher my whole life, and it didn't take me long to figure out that in order to gain the respect of children, I was going to have to dig in and get to know those kids like we talked about, and spend time and gather information about their background and really find out what makes them tick. And a lot of that comes with finding out things that can be difficult. And you find out things that children sometimes don't want to share with you, but you might find out that they've had trauma in their background. Or you might find out that a parent is in jail. And you might find out that parents have recently been divorced. You might find out that they've been abused. There's a lot of trauma that's going on with children. And it doesn't always have to be trauma, but there's also children that are moving into our country that are struggling. I saw a student the other day who had her very first day. She was a refugee from Afghanistan, and she was terrified because she was just plopped down in a kindergarten class and knew absolutely no English. But the sweetest thing that happened was as she sat there not knowing anything and big, wide-eyed and scared to death, a little boy just came up and realized that she needed a friend, and he didn't say one word to her, but he just reached out and put his hand in her hand and squeezed it.
Aww.
And he just started, bawling. Her eyes just welled up with tears, and they had this connection. They never spoke a word, and I just sat there watching this unfold. But what it said to me was that kids, despite whatever grade they're in, or adults, we just need connection, and we need relationships. And for us to do well in life, connections and relationships are very important. And so I began starting to say this phrase, and my college students think it's funny because I say it at least once in every class that I teach. But I always say there's a story in every seat. That came because the phrase came because I would look out into the eyes of all my children in my classroom, and I would see them in their seats, and I would think to myself, each one is a little storybook, and I have to start cracking open every little story. And I need to read them from the front into the end, and their story's not over. I'm just in the middle of their story because they're going to go on and go to another, have another teacher, and they're going to grow and learn and become these wonderful humans. But what impact can I have in their little story? And what part can I play in one of the chapters in their life? And I want it to be a positive piece that they remember when they look back on that little glimpse of time. So I began to use that phrase, and then I started thinking as I began to teach middle school, I began noticing that phrase was even more powerful because bigger kids, bigger problems. And then I went on to college and tend to think that college kids have it all together because they look like grown-ups. But the reality is they're just big kids, and they need support and love and nurturing as much as our little ones do. And in a lot of cases, they come from the same brokenness or trauma that the little ones come from. And many of them will share that with me. But their stories matter as much or more as the little ones. And so that phrase has just become part of my everyday life, but not just the story in every seat in the classroom. But I think about it now as a new neighbor who moves in, and what is their story? How can I get to know them? How can I be of help to them when they need it? Or how can I just be a bright spot in their day? But as an employer, again, going back to getting to know the people that work in your workplace, I think it matters a great deal. And if you think about the story in every seat in your business, everyone has a story. They might be a grown-up, but they all have a story, and they may have trauma. They may have beautiful stories of things that they've done in lives, but people have big stories when they're older, and they have stories that they can share and we can grow from if we come together and get to know one another. And I just think that the stories can be something that we learn a great deal from.
You have touched on so many things that I passionately know. I've been in a leadership position for 25 years at least right now at this stage. And I will tell you that adults in the workplace are big kids too. They all carry a child inside. They all carry the wounds and the celebrations from the stories of their lives. And so I want to unpack a lot of what you have just shared. So I wrote a book called Getting Through What You Can't Get Over. And I talked about many different types of common traumas that everyday people deal with. So it's PTSD, anxiety, depression, but not in the military, but in everyday people. And it's been crazy how since that book came out, how many businesses and organizations, and especially like the healthcare community, emergency services, law enforcement, have asked me to come and speak to their groups and do trainings based on some things I tapped into in that book. But it goes back to what you just described, and that's trauma. Because many people, and we have varying levels of trauma depending on what our stories are, but many people have trauma in their background, and many of them have not dealt with it. So when they come to work, others around them end up dealing with some of the fallout without even knowing that's the case. And a good leader, an exceptional leader, understands the importance of getting to know each story, because each story will tell you if there is something that's impacting the work and the people around them. An exceptional leader understands that some days the most important thing you have to do is almost what I used to call having my shingle out, where I allow certain employees to come into my office in a safe, private space. And we talk about, hey, what's going on? I see these signs. Is there something troubling you? And one thing I've learned is if people are acting in anger, there's fear at the core of it. And many times that fear is attached to a story, a past experience, an historical event in their lives. And so first as leaders, and you said this at the onset when you were talking about this, you talked about respect. We need to respect that we all have stories. And even leaders, we have our own stories. We have our own stuff, our own baggage that we need to work through and deal with. But we also need to respect the fact that sometimes people are not acting out because they're just trying to be disruptive or they're trying to undermine, but maybe there's a deeper issue attached to a story from their past. And so something else you shared when you talked about the story of the little boy and the little girl. Love the story, but one of the things that really made me key in on, and again, it's applicable for adults, is the power of appropriate physical touch. And we're in a post-pandemic world, okay? We all had the heightened 2 years of COVID-19, and it's a global pandemic. And in our generation, I've never seen anything like this. But what it's done to people is it's raised anxiety levels and depression. I believe that there are some people who do have, at the very least, mild trauma related to that. But it's also caused us to separate ourselves from really interacting with other people like we used to. We're afraid to shake hands. We're afraid to touch someone's shoulder in an appropriate way. Those things that really are important and that say, hey, I do care about you. your story does matter. Your difficulty you're going through right now matters. And we need to have those kinds of connections in the workplace for us to really reach a place of deep collaboration and teamwork, I believe. So what are your thoughts about that, Stacy?
I agree wholeheartedly. I think any opportunity that employers have where they can have their teams sit down and share. And there's going to be times where people are more introverted and don't want to share in a group setting. And so they might want to share their deepest trauma, but they might be able to tell part of a story or maybe just the larger piece of a story without going into the detail. And sometimes I do that with my students, and I'll say to them, I've gone through some things, and I tell them about a time where I stepped in hot tar as a child after it had just been poured, and it was not only physically traumatic but mentally traumatic, and it was just an emotional. It was all of those things, and so I spent a long time in bed trying to heal wounds and things like that. And so I tell them, I don't go into the detail of horrible burns and things like that. But what I tell them is, we all have trauma, but the trauma can be emotional, it can be spiritual, it can take so many different forms. But what they can do is share parts of their lives with other people, and I think it allows them to feel a little bit more part of a community when they've shared something. Even if it's just a very small incremental piece of their life, it doesn't have to be a huge piece. Allowing others in just a little bit brings people together.
That's so true. And you're correct. We don't have to share every graphic detail. And frankly, we probably should not. But as leaders, if we can, again, exemplify a little vulnerability and share a little bit, maybe from our story, what that does is it opens hearts. And it opens minds. And sometimes people can see us in a different way. And a lot of leaders are scared of that because they're like, oh, well, I need to look like I'm on top. I've got it all put together. But in fact, when you can reach someone at a heart and mind level, and I'll say spiritual level too, what happens is you actually increase the effectiveness. You increase their willingness to basically do anything that you need because they see you as being reachable. But if you've got yourself up on a pedestal and you're unattainable and it feels like they could never please you or never do things as well as you, then that can make people feel defeated before they even start. So it's very important for us to open ourselves up first. And you mentioned introverts. So I'm a certified personality trainer. So I've been doing this work for a very long time. I love it. And it hits every part of humanity. But one way that it fits in the workplace with what you just described, we do need to be aware as leaders that we are not putting people in situations that are very uncomfortable. Actually, we can create a fresh trauma for someone. And I think of deep introverts. There are people who are so deeply introverted. If you put them in a group setting and ask them to speak, it would feel terrifying. They would probably go into a panic attack over it. Leader, don't do that to your people. I think it might be more appropriate. Maybe you share your story and you invite, if anyone else would share a brief, summation of their story. And if anyone's not comfortable and you say this to them, you can always reach out to me privately and we can schedule a time to sit down because I understand not everyone's comfortable sharing in an open forum, but I am interested. That respect can go a long, long way for helping people, again, to open their hearts, minds, and spirits to you and for you to gain a much greater benefit in their work. And in a time where employers are just struggling to get enough people to do the job, you can't afford to lose people. And this kind of environment, this kind of reaching people is one of those things that makes people not want to leave a place of employment because they feel cared for. They feel like the leadership sees them and they matter to them. And that is something that we all need to be aware of. We need to make sure that we stay mindful of what other people's needs are and don't just try to put them in a position of forcing them to do something that frankly is very, very uncomfortable.
Yeah, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. And I have seen people that are those deep introverted people that would feel very unnerved having to sit and share something in even a small group. So I do think it's very important that we are aware. And I think those personality tests that you were mentioning is a great tool for employers to gain some information about the people that they work with. But what I tend to find is that a lot of employers will have their employees take those tests, but then they won't do anything with the information. And so they let it sit in a drawer. And so what is the point? You have to have, and employees, they recognize that, by the way. They hate it when they are surveyed and questioned about their thoughts on something, and then they find out later it was meaningless, so they would rather not have had it in the first place. So just, you have to, as an employer, understand that if you're going to take the time to give your people a personality test, you have to know before you get those results what you're going to do with them.
Okay, you may be my new favorite person. Just so you know. Girl, I'm just telling you. I love what you just said. So this evening, I'm going to do a training for a bank branch where they use my personality assessment. So I have my own personality assessment program, P4 Personality Perspective. We do that. I've worked with this bank for a few years now. And so they use my assessments at the hiring process, not to determine whether to hire or not, but to look for identifying factors that might help determine what the best job fits might be, or where the right team is to place them in. But then I come in afterward and then I do these trainings, and it ends up being such a beautiful thing because I teach them how to use the personality information to benefit their lives as well as the benefit everybody around them. And so the engagement, the excitement, the enthusiasm that you see from these people whenever we're doing these trainings is off the chart. Everybody loves it. And it ends up being a thing where you deepen the bond, the team building among the coworkers. You boost morale, and they learn how to use that information to actually be more productive on the job. And so I love it. It's one of the most fun things that I get to do. And everybody walks away from it feeling amazing. And people get to feel good about who they are, how they were wired. But so many times employers will give a personality assessment and then they do nothing with it. And one of my goals in life is to teach people how to use personality information to make their lives better as well as the lives of those around them. So thank you for saying that. I didn't prompt that, I promise.
Yeah, but I've been one of those people that I've been in the workplace, and I've taken so many personality tests and questionnaires about myself, and then nothing has come from it. And I always think to myself, I'm one of those people. What is the use in doing this if you're not going to take the information and use it for your benefit as an employer, or our benefit as an employee, to work better together? And employees recognize that, and they see it, and they may not say it to the employer, but guaranteed they're saying it to each other. And so I think as employers, we really need to take a look at the things we do and do less, but do each of them well.
Yes. And to your point, when you do that to employees, because they kind of they get excited a little bit about learning more about themselves. And so then it's deflating if you do nothing with it. And instead of having a morale booster, you've really wasted your time and you've done more damage than good. One of the things that I teach leaders is it's better not to make a promise than to make one and break it. What this does, it's not making a promise, but it's still, you're setting someone up and then you do nothing and it just feels like a fall. And they want to know more. They want to do something with it. They actually want to do a great job for you. And so they think when you give this, that this might give them some more insights. And then it's like, it's just stripped away. It's so disheartening for people. We don't want to do that. Exceptional leadership follows through, and we don't waste time or effort. It's a waste of your time and effort to do it if you're not going to follow up and use it in some positive way. And it's certainly a waste of time and effort for your people to go through and do that survey or assessment. So if you give those, do something with it.
I agree.
Okay. So as we're winding down on our last few minutes, and this has just been such an amazing conversation, Stacy. Thank you. I want to talk about your book. So what is the name of your book? And then tell us a little summary of the book, because I know we have leaders listening who are parents or grandparents even. And so they have children, and I know, would love to reach them with the message that you've written about.
It's based on the phrase that I say on a daily basis. It's called There's a Story in Every Seat. And it's a rhyming children's book. And what it basically does is it creates, it has a teacher in it who basically looks out into her classroom like I did and sees all of these wonderful children and wants them to see their own value. And so the children begin to say things. This one's tall and this one's small and this one likes to skip and this one does all these things, but they start to recognize that despite their differences, they're all specially made and they all have wonderful value. Kind of a promise that each one of them has something in them that created specially for them. And so it's a really pretty book because a message in it to teach each child not only to value themselves and who they are, but to see the worth in all the other people that they come across on a daily basis, whether it's in school or out and about on your daily walk or in the grocery store, but to see that everyone was made with a purpose and a plan. Our outward appearance doesn't matter. It's what's inside that matters. And so that's kind of the message and the theme that goes along with it.
What you just described is a book that probably children of all ages would not only enjoy, but it would tap a deep emotional need inside of them. And I'm talking about whether it's a child of 2, who frankly, we need to start speaking that message into children of 2. They're going to grow into adults. And if they don't have confidence, if they undervalue their worth, if they feel unworthy, then they're going to act out of that as adults. Or if it's a child of, let's say, 60, it doesn't matter. The fact is, all of us have this intrinsic need to believe in ourselves. And yet, I know the higher majority of people that I interact with, when I have private one-on-ones and I've gotten to know them and we've established a relationship, and because of some of the work that I do, many people will confess to me that they feel insecure. They feel less than. They feel as if they're not really adequate for the job that they've been given to do. They don't feel worthy of even sometimes their family or friends or the good things that God has given them. That is a sad state. But what I know about it is when people have those kinds of feelings about themselves, oftentimes they will behave and act negatively out of those feelings, but not understand that they're doing it. It's on a subconscious level, and that can be undermining for them. It can be undermining for the organization that they work for. So the message, the heart of that message in your book is something we could all benefit from. So tell us the title of the book. And then after that, Stacy, if you will, tell our listeners where they can find out more about you.
Okay, great. So the name of the book is There's a Story in Every Seat. And I have another book that's also out. You can find it in all the major stores, called Good One God. Teaches children to appreciate everything that they see in nature and all around them. So you can find information about those books and anything else that I write on Stacy Leicht, LEICHT.com. And I also have a Facebook page, my author page, called Stacy Elizabeth, which is my middle name.
Okay. Now, is that your pen name for your books, or are your books under Stacy Leicht?
No, my children's books are under Stacy Leicht, but I have some fiction suspense books, actually, that don't have anything to do with what we talked about today. But those are under a pen name, actually.
Okay. What's the pen name?
Tess Hardy, Hardy.
Tess Hardy. Okay. Well, and every leader needs the occasional, what I call mental break and emotional escape. So sometimes a good fiction book fits the bill. Stacy, it has been an absolute delight to talk with you today. Thank you so much. I feel like much of what we've discussed, well, all of what we've discussed, this is information leaders need to know. They need to give themselves permission to deal with some of their own stories They need to open up their hearts, minds, and spirits to share a little bit appropriately, not in graphic detail, not TMI, but appropriately some of their story, and then allow their people to share a little bit of their stories with them. When you do that, you're going to strengthen the team and you're going to increase and enhance productivity, performance, which leads to profitability. Listener, for you, as always, I just want to remind you, you have a choice. You're going to lead someone today, but the question is, are you going to lead? Are you going to influence exceptionally well? If you've not been intentional, be intentional today and make that choice to live exceptionally. Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Exceptional Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Anita Brooks. And I just want to remind you of a truth. If you are not leading at the level that you want to be at, remember, it is never too late for a fresh start with fresh faith. You can start today. You can start making a difference. You can help the world become a better place. You can begin to lead with intent. Your family, your friends, the people you work with, your community, in your church, in our nation, across the planet. Whatever opportunities come your way, remember that did not happen by accident. And by stepping up and leading exceptionally well, you will help fulfill the purpose you were created for.